Hey folks, James Green here, partner and VP of Content at Actual Tech Media, and I'm back for another Q&A show. Today we're going to be talking about proactive infrastructure management. It's the term I use to describe what we're going to talk about here. I think it's actually a little broader than that, but a lot of IT departments are saying, hey, we want to be more proactive about things. But the reality is it's pretty hard to do. There's so much to tackle, and a lot of us feel like we're just constantly putting out fires, and it's hard to be proactive. And so my guest today, who I'm going to introduce in a second, is an expert on being proactive. And so that's kind of what we're going to center the conversation around today. But like I said, we're going to touch on more. So before we get started, I want to introduce Kev, my guest today, or actually, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So Kev, say hello to the audience for me, and then we'll get going.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, firstly, thanks to Actual Tech for having me. My name's Kev Johnson. I'm a senior systems engineer at Runecast Solutions. So I deal with all kinds of the technical side of the sales process and making sure that our customers are getting the best value out of the product. And proactive is one of the things that we're really, really keen on helping people with. So I'm really glad that we get the chance to do that today. Perfect.
So, yeah, proactive for a lot of people feels like a pipe dream. And so I guess the first question I have for you right out of the gate is like, is that even an attainable thing? Can we get to a point where things are so under control that we can start addressing problems before they happen instead of just putting out fires?
Yeah, so I mean that's one of the really important things. We're also used to putting out fires, and unless we actually move towards a more proactive model, we're doomed to a lifetime of putting out fires. And all that time that you spend putting out fires is basically dead time. You never get any value out of that time. So what we're really hoping to help people do is, monitor their environment, point out where you've got these latent risks, these problems, these potentially security problems, potentially problems that could bring down your environment. So you can nip them in the bud. So you're expending far less energy and time dealing with these problems than you would if you had to actually put those fires out. And once you can do that, then you can go home on time and you get your evenings back, you get your weekends back. And that's really important to me as a time-served sysadmin. So yeah, we've got to do that. And we've got to use tools like Runecast in order to do that.
Yeah, it's important to me too. I'm going on probably 10 years off of pager duty, and I never want to go back. The same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So let's talk about kind of when you get down to it, practically, what does that look like? What do we need to do to get to a state where we can actually be proactive? Is it working 16-hour days to get ahead of it, or what do we have to do to start getting there?
Yeah, so I mean, we've all been there, right? So you work those 16-hour days, and then you're just about to go home, and then you get another call because there's another Sev1 incidents come in, and 90% of these issues, if we're looking at a standard, traditional software-defined data center, we're looking at things like vSphere, things like vSAN, Horizon, NSX, all of these tools. 90% of the issues that cause outages, they're already documented. All of this information already exists somewhere. Usually it's within the VMware knowledge base. Now, there's just over 28,000 knowledge base articles published in the English language. So, there's a lot of information there. And the problem is, nobody reads these sources of data until something's down and they're looking through logs and they're trying to find a match and find out what's going on in their environment. So what we do is we take all of that knowledge and we provide it to you in a virtual appliance. You then scan your environment against that virtual appliance, and we identify all of the configuration items, all of the logs that we can pull data from. And we go, okay, great, here are all of the things that are likely to go wrong at some point in your environment unless you make some changes. And some of those changes are going to be real simple. They're going to be things like, apply this patch. They're going to be things like, okay, yeah, you need to tighten up your password security policy, things like that. So we're not just talking about things that can bring things down, we're talking about security, and that kind of feeds into compliance as well. But we need a tool that can do something like that. And the only tool I'm aware of on the market today that can do this is Runecast.
Yeah, so there are tools that exist, and even some of this is built into some platforms to check the basics. But This is an area that I used to spend a lot of time hands-on as well, and I'm not aware of anything else that will go out there and for example, look at all the published knowledge base articles and figure out, does any of this apply to you, which is pretty cool. We're going to talk more about security later, which is one of the things you mentioned, but let's talk about patching stuff that might break. That's, you mentioned that too. And so like on vSphere, like the host tipping over with a purple screen is something that everybody has experienced once, hopefully not 100 times. That's something where sometimes there's a known issue, and had we known about that when it was published a month ago, we could have done something about it. Give me a couple of examples, if you've got them, of those sorts of things that we can avoid just by knowing about it ahead of time.
Yeah, sure. So one of the top causes of purple screens of death, and full disclosure, prior to joining Runecast, I used to work for VMware, and my job there was literally to get people to upgrade off unsupported versions of vSphere. So I had a lot of conversations with customers. And those conversations, when you start talking about upgrade, the big problem is, oh, well, we've got to check the HCL. And the number one cause of those purple screens of death is non-compliant driver and firmware combinations. Now, these are typically things that you check when you deploy your servers, and those servers sit in the rack for maybe 3, 4, 5, in some cases up to 8 years. So they were fine when you deployed them. But since that's happened, there's been a whole bunch of new firmwares and drivers and things like that that have come out, and nobody knows to check those. There's the VMware hardware compatibility list, which we can also help with, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. But all of this knowledge is out there, but you have to proactively scan in order to be aware of these things. Something else. So, for example, there's regularly VMware security advisories published, and so they send out emails with this information in. And if you subscribe to that list, you get all of that information, and it's really good, high quality information. But a lot of people just don't subscribe to those lists, so they're not aware of these potential issues. And the security advisory side of things, these are things that could potentially, there was one in fact, I think it was last week, had a score of 9.8 out of 10. So that's how bad it was. Now, if somebody had access to your management network and they could get to one specific port on your ESXi hosts, they could cause all kinds of problems. So unless you're proactive in monitoring against these things, you're at risk of all of these kind of problems, and you don't want to be the person who's having to clear that up. You don't want to be that latest breach. So this is one of the many things that we can help you with.
So let's keep talking about the HCL a little. I used to be a consultant focusing on vSphere environments, and so that's something I spent a lot of time checking myself. I never liked it. I know my customers never liked it. It's just a burden. And you're right, a lot of problems that come up are a result of somebody who glossed over that, didn't check it like they should have, and now they've caused a problem. Talk a little bit about the process of checking the HCL, and maybe you can add some color to how Runecast makes that not painful, because again, there are some built-in ways to check certain things, but not to the extent that Runecast doesn't. Again, I'm not trying to make it a Runecast commercial, but I haven't seen anything else in the way that Runecast does. It's cool.
Likewise. So, there's a number of things that you need to check. So typically when someone buys some servers, they will go to the VMware HCL and they'll go, okay, right, Dell PowerEdge R740, great, they're on the HCL, brilliant. We'll buy 50 of those, we'll rack them, and we'll build some clusters out of them. And they arrive, and you might think, okay, right, they all came at the same time. I bought them all at the same time. They're all going to be running the same BIOS, the same drivers, the same firmware. And chances are some of those have been sat on the shelf a little bit longer than the others. And so you've got a bit of a mishmash. So there's tools out there definitely that you can use to help manage these things. Dell have got a suite called Open Manage that does that. HP have got their own tools. Each OEM has their own tools to manage these things. But typically they go in a rack, they get ESXi installed, and that is the last time people look at firmware. So if you're doing things like, occasionally what happens is, especially if we start thinking about vSAN, storage controller drivers are super important there. Firmwares are super important. And in order to be able to make sure that you're not going to have anything catastrophic happen or any performance issues, you always need to make sure that you're running those versions that have been checked rigorously, not only by the vendors, but also by VMware themselves. So all of that information goes into the VMware HCL, but in order to check it, you need to check a whole bunch of different ID numbers and things like that, the vendor ID, the sub-vendor ID, the device ID. And then you have to pull all of that in and check it against the build of ESXi that you're running. So you installed, I don't know, ESXi 6.7 update 3, great. And then you patched it a few times and then you upgraded to vSphere 7. Did you check those? Did you check everything at the point where you did the upgrade? There's a pretty good chance that you didn't, and there's a pretty good chance that some stuff has changed there as well. So there are other ways of doing it, as you mentioned, James. You can. There's a fling from VMware that you can point at vCenter, and it runs a bunch of Python scripts, and it will check things from the HCL for you. But that works at a vCenter scale. It doesn't work. If you've got 50 vCenter servers, if you're running a really large environment, if you're a service provider, that doesn't scale very well at all. So with Runecast Analyzer, you just point it at all of your different vCenter servers. We pull all of that data together and we check it against the HCL for whatever version of vSphere you're running. So we can identify problems now. And then if you're thinking about doing upgrades, things like, it's vSphere 7 update 1's out now. Typically that's when we see enterprises start thinking about doing these upgrades. So, people are going to want to check all of their existing hardware against that HCL and see what needs to be replaced. Some stuff probably does need to be replaced. There was VMK Linux drivers retired and all of that kind of thing. But we can do a very, very quick check. All you have to do, there's a drop-down box. You select the version you want to go to, and we'll check everything against the HCL for the version that you're going to. And we can do all of this very, very quickly because we already have all of the data in the appliance. Nothing's going outside of your control. You don't have to send anything to any cloud services or anything like that. So, it's really, really helpful to be able to check that at large scale. And as you say, there's a tool built into vSphere 7. So if you're already at vSphere 7, you can already check some of this capabilities. But you're dependent on what version of vSphere you're running, dependent on what version of vSphere Lifecycle Manager, and how you're managing your updates there. You can either do that at a per host basis or a per cluster basis. And again, when you're running very large environments, that does not scale well. You've got to be at vSphere 7 as well. So, there's a lot we can bring to the table. We've got lots of reporting capabilities that can really help you plan and figure out what's going on, where things might need to, where tin might need to be replaced, where you can maybe sweat those assets for another 2 or 3 years just by upgrading some drivers and firmware.
Yeah, I think a lot of people view the process of checking all this out as sort of I don't know, smart but not entirely necessary. You know what I mean? They think, yeah, it would be a good idea, but I've got so many other things to do. I don't have time for that. Okay, you just mentioned like storage stack compatibility. It's not really a place you want to play fast and loose, right?
No.
It's pretty important.
No. Yeah, I mean, you've got anything where you've got HBAs that, if you've got interfaces flapping there, or you've got, your queue depth isn't working out for you, you could potentially resolve these things just by upgrading to a newer supported driver and firmware combo. So storage is super important because anything that can cause data loss at all is just an absolute no-no. So yeah, we're helping you to identify these things. So storage, network adapters, even the server BIOS, we can help you figure out what needs to be done, and help you then plan and formulate a plan of attack as to how you go about doing that. And you can do it very quickly with minimal overhead.
Okay, so that's the uptime, downtime conversation. There's a lot of uptime we can gain by kind of proactively taking care of those things. The other place people get bogged down and spend a lot of time is in trying to manage their security posture and compliance. And similar to interoperability, it's a lot of times just this, 400-page list of things that I need to check against. And best case scenario, it's going to take me forever, a month of checking these things off. So let's talk about, for smaller teams who have to deal with this, I think sometimes they're the most freaked out about it. Mm-hmm. How obviously the answer is probably Runecast, but how can they start to do that in a way that is less painful?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing you need to do is kind of figure out, well, do I need to abide by these specifically regulatory compliance guidelines? And in the case of a lot of organizations, the answer is going to be, well, yes, you do. If you're processing payment card details, you need to abide by PCI DSS. It's not negotiable. But in some situations, maybe actually all you want to do is just improve that security posture. You're not really sure, you've just deployed something and you've just kind of gone with the defaults for everything. And in that kind of situation, there are definitely things that you can do to make your life easier by just making a few configuration changes. And one of my ex-colleagues at VMware, Mike Foley, is now Bob Plankers who looks after it, but Mike Foley spent a long time working on the VMware Security Configuration Guide, also known as the VMware Hardening Guide. And there's a lot of really good advice in there about ways that you can improve your security posture. But I mean, it's not the monster that it used to be, but it used to be an absolute monster, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, especially now you start thinking about things like running Kubernetes on vSphere. So there's all of that Kubernetes side of things that you need to secure as well. So yeah, if you need to be compliant with specific standards, you absolutely need to be compliant with those. That's non-negotiable. But even if you don't need to be compliant with them, if you're not mandated, it's still a really good idea to do what you can to improve your security posture. And Runecast has this capability to scan against a lot of different standards. We got things like PCI DSS. We got things like DISA STIG for the US military. We got GDPR for AWS. I've not even mentioned the fact that we've got AWS coverage as well yet. We can cover that a little bit more in a few minutes. But there's a whole bunch of different standards. We work really closely with the folks at the Center for Internet Security as well. So we help them to develop their baselines, their benchmarks that they publish and they make available to the public for free. So these benchmarks are available. All you have to do is download them and configure your environment in conjunction with them. But that's a lot of configuration checks that you need to make. And if you need to, maybe you need to build a PowerShell script to check your entire environment against those, and that's going to take a long time. Or you could just deploy Runecast Analyzer, tick the box, scan your environment, see where the problems are, and what you need to do in order to remediate against them. And that's, again, this is another way that we really help organizations out. So we map everything against existing security standards. We're not writing any of these things. What we do that can be quite helpful is where you're looking at regulatory compliance, we take the standards, we take the exact text out of those standards, and from there, we provide you with a technical translation. So PCI DSS, for example, is written from the perspective of the payment card industry, because they're not interested in what technology you're running. They don't care that you're running vSphere or you're running Hyper-V or you're running whatever you're running. They just say things like, you must establish a secure network to protect cardholder data. Well, how the hell do I go about doing that? So there's different points within the stack that you can really lock things down. And we help that we give you the technology, the details in the technology saying, this is how you do this, great. And for some standards as well, we have some automation available to help you get from where you are to where you want to be as well. So, having an easy button whereby you can just go, okay, run, this is going to take 5 minutes, great. We've gone from whatever the brownfield state was to a completely compliant new estate, which is super helpful. And a lot of our customers really like that.
So you started down a path there that I want to explore just a little bit before we move on to the next topic, which is in the case of checking compliance specifically, I am aware of some other tools that would allow you to do this. I've personally deployed them, and what I know about them is, one, most of them are a beast to deploy, and that's a project in itself, and getting it even ready to begin compliance checking is problematic sometimes. Another one I'm thinking of is only available to like VMware professional services and their like platinum partners or whatever that tier is. Not everybody can even use that tool. What does it look like?
The health analyzer, also what the health analyzer keeps out there is, you'll get a stack, you print it out, and it's that thick. So it provides a lot of really good data, but actually understanding what it means can take a week for a professional services consultant to kind of really whittle that down to what you need. Yeah,
I used to run those all the time. 150 pages about, I would say, every one of those reports was, and I would bill almost a whole week's worth of time to go through it, figure out what you need to do. I mean, It was a monster. So the question I'm trying to ask is, contrast that with how you would check against this with Runecast.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this actually that's a great point. So, from the perspective of Runecast, all we do, you deploy our appliance on premises. It's a really tiny virtual appliance. It's about 1.3 gig the download at the moment. Depends on the size of your environment, how many vCPUs, how much RAM you're going to need. But for example, for what we call a small environment, up to 50 ESXi hosts, you need 2 vCPUs, 4 gig of RAM. We think you can deploy the appliance and it'll take 2 minutes to deploy, probably 3 minutes to actually do the configuration, and then probably another 5 minutes, depends on the size of your environment, to run that initial scan. So you can go from the point of going, okay, I'd really like to try Runecast out, and to going, signing up, downloading the appliance, deploying it, and having actionable data within 10, 15 minutes tops. So and the great thing is, you don't have to spend a week whittling through all of the stuff to go, what does all this mean? Because every single finding, we show you what exactly this means. We show you the link to the relevant documentation, and we show you where your exposure is. So it's not just a case of you have this problem somewhere in your environment, good luck finding it. It's affecting this specific ESXi host for this reason. Here's the changes you need to make. So yeah, our time to value is super quick. And I'd urge people to try the product out. If you don't believe me, it's yeah. I was amazed when I first saw it.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so let's chat a little bit about best practices. Sounds good. Lots of people want to employ the latest best practices. One of the questions I have for you is trying to get all of your infrastructure compliant with the latest best practices something that you'll gain something from, or is it really just protecting yourself against downside? Does that make sense?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons why you're going to want to abide by these industry best practices, and in some situations, so if we start looking at things like, so we provide best practices for customers who are running SAP HANA on vSphere. So if you want to run SAP HANA on vSphere, it's entirely supported, but you have to abide by the best practices. Otherwise, any problems, they're just going to say, yeah, that's not a supported configuration. And nobody ever wants to be in that situation where you've got a system down. You've got, SAP is, if you're running SAP, you're a monster organization. Any downtime there is going to be costing you a lot of money. So there's things like that, but also, the other thing to bear in mind about best practices is just because the industry as a whole says this is the best way to deploy this, it doesn't mean that it's applicable to every single customer and every single configuration. So with that in mind, one of the other cool things that we can do is you can select to disregard any of the things that we show you. So, I mean, I would urge you to make sure you understand why they're a best practice in the first place. But if you don't want to be getting nagged about, I don't know, maybe you've got some security software that says we need to be able to SSH into all of our ESXi hosts so we can check some system configuration because we don't understand how APIs work. That software exists right now, I can guarantee you. But if you've got software that does that, then you need to be constantly running with SSH enabled. And SSH is an attack vector. Or it's a potential attack vector. So, if you want to be made aware of the fact that this is a bad idea, but if as a business you decide, actually, we have a good reason to do this, you can hit ignore and you can filter at a very granular level. So if you only want to ignore it on one specific cluster or one specific host or, configuration items on one specific virtual machine, you absolutely can do that. But you can also do it at a global level as well. So yeah, best practices are super important. Make sure you understand why they're best practices, though, and the information that we give you within Runecast Analyzer can help you weigh up and help your business to make those business risk decisions.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I could still disable the warning about having SSH enabled on an ESX host blindfolded with one arm behind my back, because that's the perfect example of what you're describing. Best practice, most hardened posture is to have it turned off. But that's so impractical for most organizations that it makes sense to ignore the best practice and leave it on. So,
yeah.
So
and the other thing around that is, the other thing around that specific warning, so you ignore it once within the vSphere client and you never see it again. So you ignore it because you want to ignore it for a couple of days, but then you forget that you've ignored it. And then you turn SSH on and nobody can see that it's happening. So again, being able to assess the things that you're ignoring on a regular basis is also important, and that's another area we can really help with.
That's a great point, and an accidental, beautiful segue into my next question, which is, how often is checking against best practices recommended as far as you're concerned? I think, like, if I have consultants in once a year and say, look this baby over, just tell me if everything's okay. Is that good enough, or should it be more often, less often?
Well, again, this is a business risk decision, but this applies equally to whether it's best practices, whether it's your security compliance, whether you're looking at things like the hardware compatibility list, whether you want to check how regularly you're going to check against, well, am I at risk of purple screens of death or other issues there? If you're in a position where you can do automated checks all year round, so if you're doing a scan once an hour, once a day, however often you want to, and then you can just look at Runecast Analyzer. We give you that graph, and as soon as you start drifting away from that compliant state, whatever that compliant state is that you've decided, you see those spikes and you know something's going on. So you can take the action, and that action is a very small action that you need to take. If you leave it until next year, the actions that you need to take are significantly larger. So the amount of effort you need to expend is significantly larger. But if you can just constantly monitor what's going on, you can, whenever you start drifting away from compliance, even if that's because of new information that's come to light, so new knowledge base articles, an update to DISA STIG, for example, you see as soon as you drift away from compliance states, and then you can really pull yourself back. It's a much more fun way, or fun's probably not the best way of describing it. It's a much less onerous way of ensuring that you're in that compliance state, and your auditors will thank you for it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, nothing makes an auditor happier than they walk in and you plunk down the report and say, we're good, look it over, check it, it's fine.
Also, here's a graph that shows how it looked all year long. So,
right. Right. Okay, so we're about out of time for today. We're approaching the top of the hour. I want to talk a little bit about hybrid cloud before we go. We've spent the majority of the discussion referencing specifically, I guess it wouldn't have to be, but mostly things that you would think of when you're talking about on-prem infrastructure. And the reality for most organizations today is there's more to it than that. So What are your thoughts on, or what do you see customers having trouble with when it comes to managing not just one on-prem infrastructure, but AWS besides, and maybe other clouds as well?
Absolutely. And I guess the problem there is typically the tool set that you use to manage your on-premises environment is going to look different to the tool set that you're using to manage other workloads. But again, without making this the Runecast Analyzer show, by the way, I work for Runecast. What we've got is this platform, and from there we can manage your vSphere, your NSX, your vSAN, your Horizon, all this stuff on premises. We can manage your Kubernetes workloads wherever they might be running. So if they're running on premises, great. If they're on bare metal, if they're running on vSphere, if they're running in a managed Kubernetes service in AWS or Azure, or it doesn't matter where it's running. We can help you manage that. We can give you these best practices and security compliance there. And just kind of moving on from that, we've got a whole bunch of coverage for different AWS services as well. So if you need compliance and best practices in AWS, we can do that for you right now. Coming real soon, so expect early in the new year, we'll be also rolling out support for Azure, and then following that, GCP as well. So we really want to be that one platform that you can use to manage your risk and compliance across everything, wherever you might want to run your workloads.
Cool. So how different is it for a team who's used to managing, say, an on-prem vSphere environment to try to apply best practices, compliance requirements, all of that to, let's just say, an AWS environment? Like, does it map straight across fairly well? A little bit, not even close?
So, I mean, the things that you need to do in order to keep your AWS environment secure are the same things you need to do on premises. Just the terminology and maybe some of the approaches to how you would do this may differ. And if you've got that on-premises skill set and you're kind of looking to help, you really need to upskill into what's going on in the cloud. Runecast Analyzer can really help with that skills gap as well, because again, we give you the information, we show you where the problem is, we show you why it's a problem, and we show you what you need to do in order to remediate those problems. So with that, it can really help to close that skills gap and help you upskill your teams that are looking after these environments.
That's something interesting I hadn't thought of. yes, it will help you get compliant or apply the best practices, but also by showing you what needs to be done, you can learn and get better. And next time, now
Absolutely.
it's not just applied, but you understand it and why and how. That's pretty cool. Okay, well, we're out of time for today. If you're watching and you want to get more content on topics like these, we've got a full library of Gorilla guides that you can download for free at gorilla.guide. If you want to hear more presentations on topics like this one, including a presentation that Kev gave on one of our summits back in August, you can head over to events.actualtechmedia.com and watch that event on demand, or a whole wide variety of other events on demand, as well as register to be live on upcoming events. If you want to learn more about Runecast, obviously head over to runecast.com. You can also follow them at Runecast. And if you're an IT vendor and could participate in a Q&A show like this one, I have a lot of fun. I'd love to talk about having you on. So hit connect@actualtechmedia.com and let's talk about it. And that's it. Kev, thanks so much for doing this today. It was a fun chat. This is an area I have a lot of experience and, frankly, pain. So I enjoyed chatting with you about it and commiserating.
Thanks for having me, James. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.